prosecution of Daniel Penny is an outrage. It's a miscarriage of justice. We are here for Daniel Penny because he did the right thing. He cared enough to get involved. And isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we want, to have good people get involved?
We're saying, how could someone coming from behind that was not under any threat, an unarmed man who was making noise, maybe annoying, how do you choke him to death, hold him down, feel him go lifeless, and still not let go? That's what he's charged with.
Welcome. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News, a 30-minute docuseries centered on the issues keeping Americans up at night. So, for all those tired of politically spun, opinion-based news and seeking a fact-based breakdown of the major stories of the day, well, you hit the right channel. For today, the Penny prosecution. Reckless or reasonable. By the end of today's episode, you will have enough factual information to make an educated decision. Apart from all the rhetoric, you will be given the information you need to know the truth. Also, bearing in mind that this case, when it goes to trial, will be centered on just 2 or 3 major issues, and that's it. Today we're going to cover those. So by the time we finish this episode, you will have a firm understanding about exactly what this case is about. So with that being said, you saw the B-roll, that news clip that came up at first. You saw that. So what you know right now for sure is that there are 2 diametrically opposed views. There's reckless. There's the view that says he's a former Marine who was trained to kill, and he intentionally choked this man out, possibly because of race, and he's dead as a result of it. And then you have the reasonable, which, kind of store this to the side for a second, because this is going to be one of the biggest issues that affects you, the listener, right now. Because was this reasonable? As a result of this case, it's going to decide a lot of things, but one thing it's certainly going to decide is the age-old question of the reasonable man, now called the reasonable person test. What would a reasonable person do? This case is going to decide that. Was it reasonable? We know that there are allegations that Neely, the deceased, came on the train, threatened the lives of people, said he was ready to die, and presented a scenario where allegedly people were in fear of their life, leaving Penny in the situation where he felt he needed to exercise his legal right under New York state law to defend himself and others from what he is saying was in fact a deadly threat. We're going to break this down, but before we do, what I want to make sure that we do right now, though, is let's lay out the law. Let's make sure you understand exactly what laws we are talking about, and more importantly, what the material elements are of the law. So what does that mean? Material elements are the breakdown of any law. One of our executive producers was telling me when we were talking about this case about how oftentimes people cringe when they hear about the law, and that's understandable. It's more than understandable because, look, it's complicated. We're going to just break this down to make it very, very clear. So we're going to start with this. Now we know, first of all, we know that Penny was indicted. He was indicted on 2 charges. He was indicted on second-degree manslaughter. Now, second-degree manslaughter, in accordance with New York state law, says that it occurs when a person recklessly causes the death of another person. That's the definition. There's no more than that. Which begs the question, what is reckless? So, in New York state law, the definition of reckless, and I quote, when he or she is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk. Now hold on to that, because I'm going to be getting back to that. Before we dive into Penny's defense, let's talk about what this case is not. That's a good starting point. What is this case not about? Now, you saw from the B-roll in the beginning of the show where there's a certain news station that opens up and lambastes the whole criminal record. He had 42 criminal arrests. He's a convicted felon. He assaulted women, etc. Okay. I'm not going to dispute the fact that Neely has a criminal or had a criminal record. There's no question that he did. I don't have it in front of me. I don't know how many actual arrests he had. Were there multiple? Yes. Were there convictions? Yes. But why is it that his criminal record is not a mitigating issue in this case? And the answer to that, regardless of the hype, because I know we keep hearing that, right? We keep hearing, well, look, this is a convicted felon. He comes on the train. He's threatening people. What are you supposed to do? I get it. The bottom line is that it has nothing to do with this because Penny didn't know that Neely had a criminal record. All Penny knew was there was an individual he perceived as a threat, didn't know about his criminal record. So all the rhetoric, all the hype that you've heard about his criminal record, throw that out. Doesn't make a damn bit of difference. So that's gone. Now, the other part, as you look on the opposite side of that diametrical difference in the rhetoric that has no bearing on this case, is the system failed Neely on the mental health side. He had a mental illness, the system failed him. That has absolutely nothing to do with this case. You may shake your head, shake it all you want, because at the end of the day, the bottom line is it doesn't matter if he had a mental illness or not pertaining to the law. What does matter is the threat that he presented on that train, and we're going to get into exactly what the law says about what you can and cannot do, and how much force was used and when it was used until the end of the scenario. That's what we're going to get into right now because, ladies and gentlemen, I assure you, regardless of the multitude, the plethora of issues that are on the table with this case, and it is a lot, that's why we chose this one to start with, it's imperative you understand what this case is not about. Now, I find it interesting that we've also made it about the fact that Penny is a former Marine. I've heard Marine mentioned over and over and over again. What if he was in the Air Force? Would we have done that if he was an airman? Or are we saying that just because he was a Marine? It's a good question. Because we're supposing something. There's a lot of supposition here. We're supposing, and I've heard the talk on both sides, about being a Marine, using a chokehold the way he was trained. He was trained to kill from a chokehold. Now, we don't know that, but you can rest assured that in the trial, the state, the District Attorney's Office of New York County, will subpoena his former training officers and supervisors while he was in the Marines to testify precisely as to what he was trained to do. But until that testimony comes up, that's still a question mark. So let's break this down a little bit further as far as what we know so far. We know it's not about his criminal record. We know it's not about a history of mental illness. What we do know is they're on a train, a group of people on a subway train. Now, for those of you that have been on a subway, you get this a lot more than most people because you're on this train in the tunnel. It's moving at a high rate of speed. Now, someone comes on that train, allegedly, because I haven't seen the tape. No one has. In fact, the indictment is still sealed. So someone comes on this train, and allegedly, they're threatening to, quote unquote, this individual, Neely's threatening to kill the people on the train. I'm ready to die, is allegedly what he says. Bearing in mind, there is a camera on that subway car. There is audio on that subway car. So we will hear that later on when this goes to trial, exactly what was said. Why is that so important? Now let's get down to the law, because this is where we're going to understand what goes on with this case. Now, as I mentioned earlier, second-degree manslaughter in the state of New York State Penal Code, stipulates it occurs when a person recklessly causes the death of another person. Recklessly. I read to you the definition of recklessly. Now, that is a Class C felony, carries up to a 15-year sentence. Now, he's also indicted on a separate charge of criminally negligent homicide. Stay with me on this. This is defined as causing another person's death with criminal negligence. That is, when the person who caused another's death failed to perceive a substantial and unjustifiable risk, much lesser charge. That's why it carries a lesser penalty, much less to prove. Because now you're not trying to prove reckless, you're trying to prove that the other person caused their death. Mitigating factors. Clearly, if you look at the video footage that's out there right now, you will see Penny in a chokehold with Neely clearly under his control. You'll see two other individuals restraining Neely to the ground. That's what we've seen so far. You can see what appears to be Neely tapping on his leg, the universal signal of, all right, I give up. What we don't know is what was said, what was still being said. All of this information still has to come out. Why am I saying that? Because we run on facts here. That's why we created this show. And right now, the main fact that we do not have is the threat that was presented. Now, how long was that threat presented? Did it stop? Did it slow down? Could he have let go? Well, now it comes down to what's Penny's defense. So now Penny's defense under New York State Penal Code 35.15. Now I want everyone to bear in mind with every one of our cases that we're going to work and we're going to present here on television, I'm going to tell you that you will be able to go to factbasednews.com, go to our landing page, go to the website, and you will go to the library. Every single thing that I discuss here, everything that any of our guests discuss will be in the library. We urge you, I beseech you, fact check us. Because what's most important, and this is a prime example, you are entitled to the facts. We are not only going to broadcast them, we're going to put them in the library so they'll be evergreen. You can refer to them whenever you want. So now with that said, New York State Penal Law 35.15, justification of use of physical force in the defense of a person. This is the defense that Penny's attorney is going to lodge when they get into court. And it's really important you stay with me on this. To the extent that he or she reasonably believes, remember I got to reasonable before, we're going to come back to that, such to be necessary to defend himself or herself from a third person, from what he or she reasonably believes to be the use or imminent use of unlawful physical force by such person. Now, reasonably believes. Did Penny reasonably believe that Neely was presenting such a risk and a threat to himself and others? Because what it clearly states is about defending himself or a third party. Did he reasonably believe it was necessary? In his defense, he's going to say yes. No question about it. But now we have exceptions, and it's important you understand because this, you're going to probably hear broadcasted. We already have heard some of the rhetoric about why didn't he retreat? So what New York State Penal Law 3515 speaks to about that is, and it's very specific about retreating, where it says that he has to reasonably believe that such other person is using or about to use deadly physical force. He's already stated that that's what he believed. Unless they can retreat, if in fact they can retreat. Now, Penny, and for those of you, stay with me on this, for those of you that have been in a subway in any city, just use New York City for this example, and it's moving at a high rate of speed, are you going to change cars? Because the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Association, clearly tells you not to change cars. Do you change cars or do you stay in the car? I'm asking you because this is a question the jury is going to have to decide. Could he have retreated? Yes or no? If he let him go, would Neely have come up and then recreated that threat to himself and the other people on that train? We don't know. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is the information we need to find out. That is the subject matter. It's the other issues that we have to face here. And it's important, again, we drill down on this. What are the other issues that are on the table right now with this case? And I will tell you, one of the biggest issues, and I think that we're going to see this over and over again, but I ask you, and by all means, write into us at info@factbasednews.com, because we want to hear from you. Our producers want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. But one of the things that we need to ask ourselves right now is the whole thing about being reasonable. So one of the things that I learned early on in my college career at John Jay in Manhattan was the reasonable man theory, now referred to as the reasonable person theory. What would a reasonable person do? I offer this. There's a lot of talk right now as to whether or not the reasonable person would do nothing for fear of prosecution, for fear of getting hurt, for a sense of timidity, for not really caring about the other person. So I ask you, and write us about this, because I'd like to know, because I assure you that there are a number of things that are going to be decided in this case, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why we picked it for our first one. And one of the biggest things, outside of whether or not Penny was reckless or he's reasonable, one of the biggest things that's going to be decided from this case is what the reasonable person theory will be going forward. That's right. Will it be get involved, or will it be walk away? So I ask you what you're going to do. The other part about this case that really speaks to all Americans right now, and that is, are you safe in public? I mean, it's a good question. Are you safe? Do you feel safe in public? Whether it be a mall or whether it be a subway car. And does this case speak to what you're entitled to do and what you're not entitled to do? And yes, it does. It speaks to item 5 here is the use of force. How much force can you use to defend yourself? How far can you go to defend yourself? And what's reasonable as it relates to using force and what's reckless? So one of the biggest takeaways from today is for us to put our arms around this case and for us to understand that, yes, this is to decide the issue as of whether he's going to be guilty or not. I get that. The other issue that's on the table right now clearly is the mental health issue. Now, you will see it in shows that we're going to do here in the coming weeks and months relative to mental health, mass shootings, mental illness. You're going to see that because the numbers are staggering. We're going to talk about, and you're going to hear this talked about on the news as this case goes to trial, about was Neely let down by the system? Do we have the right insurance coverage? Is enough money being spent on dealing with mental illness? And how does that conflict and how does that collide with your right of feeling safe in public? And what can you do to defend yourself? Now, there have been other cases that have come up right in New York City subsequent to this case that are being decided on a self-defense basis. So we've seen laws change around the entire country relative to stand your ground, what I can do, what I can't do. So let's make sure we're clear about the multitude of issues that are going to be decided on this case. So item last, before I cut here, and we're going to take some questions that we had written in by our audience. But item last that I really want to cover is, what does this have to do with you? I mean, it's a fair question. Because let's address the big issue here that we've seen over and over again, and that is race. Is this a case of a white Marine that kills a black homeless man in New York City? Is that what this case is about? Because a lot of people say yes, and a lot of people say no. So I ask you, because I know a lot of people have asked me that question, and I will give you the answer to that question. The answer is, I have no idea. Now, some may say, Well, you know what? Listen, of course he's going to say he has no idea. Well, I don't, do you? Because the only one that's going to know, and it will be discussed, the only one that's going to know if this was race-driven is Penny. And they will go back with a fine-tooth comb, and they are going to closely examine everything that he's done in his professional history, his military history. They're going to find people that he served with. They're going to subpoena them. They're going to depose them. They're going to ask them questions. Did he ever say anything? Did he ever do anything that was racist? Did he discriminate? Did he use extra force? Did he do anything that would have made you believe that he could do such a thing? Those questions are going to be asked. There's no question about that. But to make that decision now because you see a white guy that gets a black guy in a chokehold and then go out and stampede across the entire city to say that it's racist, you simply don't know the answer to that. So don't embarrass yourself. Because the only thing you're doing is drawing a line deeper in the sand. That's not going to help us. One of the main reasons we started the show is to lay on facts. So if we want the facts, then let's make sure we watch closely as this trial comes up relative to the subject of whether this was race or not. Because all the things that I just mentioned to you, all of them are going to be brought out in this trial. Every single one. So what's this have to do with you? Well, clearly, do you feel safe when you go in public? Are you going to feel safe going forward? If you're the reasonable person, what do you do? Did he use too much force? Or is he entitled to do what he has to do to protect himself? Did the system fail Neely because of his mental health issue? And did that have anything to do with him getting on a train, saying what he allegedly said, doing what he allegedly did, and then causing that result? As I said, and I'll repeat here before we close up, the only things that are going to matter and count in this case is what can be proven relative to the threat he presented and the use of force that Penny used prior to Neely's death. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that makes up the facts of this case. And we'll see that as we go forward. I'm going to switch real quickly. And every show you will see that, and again, I emphasize, please write to us, ask us questions. If you want us to do a certain show, don't hesitate. Again, it's info@factbasednews.com. Write in, and if you have questions on any particular show, that today you watch this show, if you want to have these questions read, write them in, and we'll address them on the next show. Very much audience-centric. So please play into that. Please work with us on that and be a part of the show. We really want you to be. So I had a couple of questions for today. One question, will Penny have a fair trial seeing that he's already being tried by the media? From Tom in Pennsylvania. It's a good question, Tom, because a lot of people will say that a New York County or a Manhattan jury is going to be inherently liberal and will probably go against Penny. That's what a lot of people will say. The answer to that is you would only hope that the voir dire, the selection process of the jury, is going to be valid and reliable, and that they will kick people based on good, solid questioning that will not be, fair and reasonable during the course of the trial. That's our only hope. The jury system's flawed. There's nothing you could say about that. There's human beings that sit and evaluate the future of another human being. That's a jury. If you've been on one, you know. So they're inherently flawed. So we just don't know the answer to that, Tom, but it's a great question. Second question, if the situation were reversed and a white homeless guy was choked by a black veteran, do you think charges would be filed? Ryan, I'll answer it this way. I would hope that justice, because she is blind, folded, I would hope that it really doesn't make a difference, regardless of what the color of the person is on one end and the color of the person is on the other end. I would hope that's the case. I don't know. And for me to really judge on that, I can't. I will tell you that if we've gone so far as if to say that that is the case, we're a lot worse off than Neely is. That I can tell you for sure. Now, at this point of every show, what we try to do is to leave you with things that you can take away. One of the things that, especially in my career in law enforcement and public speaking, and as a police trainer for many, many years, I could tell you that one of the most important things is to make sure people have a takeaway. What are you going to leave this show with? So at the end of every show, we will be dedicating a certain amount of time, and I'm somewhat old school, but going to what we refer to the board. And being that I am old, we used to use a cork board. Now, you see on a lot of TV shows, they have marker boards and all that kind of stuff. But at this point, I'd like to leave you with some thoughts about our show today. Things that you can take with you about this particular case. The first thing, and you'll see this come up on our cork board, Neely's criminal record is not relevant in the use of force. You're going to hear this go over and over and over again, and I cannot emphasize enough to make sure we keep that in check, because Neely's criminal record is not a factor. Did Penny feel his life or the life of the other subway riders was in danger based upon Neely's actions? As you see this trial pan out, that is the question that Penny's defense attorneys are going to have to answer. Did he feel that way? What are they going to do? They're going to, the city, or the state of New York, and Penny's defense attorneys, they are going to subpoena everything that's available. Every witness statement, every piece of CCTV footage, camera footage, audio footage, everything will be brought to bear to prove that one point. Did he feel his life or the life of others was threatened? And that's going to be the key to this. What is the video and the audio of the subway car show? Now, there's a video inside that car, and that'll be played during the trial. That's going to be key as well, because remember, it may have started, as one of our executive producers, Eric Conahia, has said, it may have started as reasonable and ended reckless. And that's very possible. But that's something, as you evaluate this case, you're going to be able to determine based on the evidence, God willing, that's going to be presented. Did Neely give up and stop fighting? Or did he keep fighting, and did he keep threatening? That's going to answer that last question. Was it reasonable or was it reckless? Was Penny reckless by New York State penal law standards, or was he reasonable? I gave you the law. Go to factbasednews.com, go to our library, look up the law, follow those laws as you see this case unfold, and you will, with certainty, be able to answer that question. Was he reasonable? Was he reckless? Last but not least, has the reasonable person standard changed? Ladies and gentlemen, as we close out this show, I will tell you that there's probably, I don't want to say nothing more, but I can say clearly, by far, one of the most important aspects that's going to come out of this case. Again, why we chose it for our first. If that changes, so many things will change inside our society. So many things. And we simply can't let that happen. Because if it does, it's a snowball effect. So you take that with you from today, and we will be watching closely if that standard has changed. Please make sure you tune in to us again next week. We're going to be covering the Memphis PD tragedy, and we'll be talking about that in great depth. I'm Paul Viollis. This is Fact-Based News.